On 5th April 2022, in an event organized by Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok, a distinguished panel of IPCC authors and policy experts from South Asia came together to discuss about the IPCC 2022 report and its implications to South Asia. The panel began with the first question to Professor Joyshri Roy, and we asked her to summarize the findings of all the 3 working group reports of IPCC and tell us what it means to South Asia.
With every increment of global warming, changes get larger in regional mean temperature, precipitation, and soil moisture. So to limit global warming, strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in CO2, methane, and other greenhouse gases are necessary. Working Group 2 shows with high degree of confidence that climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Impacts are becoming more complex as multiple hazards will occur simultaneously. At 2-degree warming by 2050, people in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Central and South America, and on small islands are likely to experience food shortages, leading to malnutrition. Also, it says restoring wetlands and rivers, land use planning, forest management can reduce flood risk. However, currently global developmental and adaptive actions are not on track to achieve a climate resilient, sustainable world. Working Group 3 says, unless there are immediate and deep greenhouse gas emissions reductions across all sectors and all regions, 1.5 degrees Celsius is beyond reach. For taking actions, the next few years will be critical, so the development pathways in all countries shifts towards sustainable development. The report comes up with the option that can be implemented, supported by governance, policy, and finance immediately, which can help in reducing the emission by half by 2030. All these actions to limit global warming help achieve sustainable development goals better, and human well-being increases when likely imbalances and distributional justice is attended to by the policy actions. So the key message is accelerated and equitable climate action in mitigating and adapting to climate change impacts is critical to sustainable development. I'll stop here now so that I give chances to others.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Roy. I think you made it very, very clear that it is time to act. And if you really want to achieve sustainable development, there is no way but you have to take this report very seriously. So we will come to the policymakers and would like to hear how they are reading this report. But before we do that, I would like to invite now Professor Dhakal, who is also one of the CLAs of the Working Group 3 report. Since this report got, was out yesterday, Professor Dhakal, I would like to know from you, how is this report, the assessment, the findings of this report is different than the earlier assessments? And where do we really stand? Because there's a lot of confusion. Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? And are we really going to breach this 1.5 degree safety net? So if you could please give us some idea on that.
Yes, very good afternoon to all of you, and thank you, Anamika, for organizing this event. You rightly mentioned that we had a few sleepless nights, but it was worth doing it. So we are very happy that the report is released last night. And now, regarding what's new in this report, this is the 6th cycle of IPCC assessment. There is a great deal of new knowledge which has emerged in the literature, scientific literature, since the 5th assessment report, which was done in 2013. So this is perfect time to synthesize all the new evidences, new knowledge that have come abroad. Now, again, in the last several years, we have seen a range of the climate policies has increased. The new laws and the pledges are also emerged to reduce the emission and to avoid greenhouse gas emission. Now, this report provides basically updated assessment of all those pledges also. Also, you might have observed that in last several years, a range of different renewable energy technology have really reduced the cost dramatically. So this report also addressed some of these emerging technological advances and what actually it means to emission mitigation. Again, in this cycle of IPCC, we have also new scenarios, the new type of scenarios that explore the possibility of the very deep greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030 and 2050. This scenario actually reduced the temporary warming, or sometimes we call it overshoot, and they rely less on the negative, CO2 emission and reversing climate in the second half of the century. So this is something new here. And also, I think we have few new innovations in this particular cycle. The chapter, actually, Professor Joyashree led social aspect of the mitigation. This is a new innovation in this cycle. Also, we have other innovative chapter on actually innovation, technology, and development and transfer. So also we are trying to put this, report in the context of sustainable development. So these are some of the new, innovations among many other. And I think you asked me the question of the emission trends. In this report, we have shown that in this decade, the average annual greenhouse gas emission were higher than any previous decades in the recorded human history. We emit roughly 59 gigaton of CO2 equivalent, which is around 54% higher than 1990 actually, which is where we started discussing about climate change. What it also means that we are not on track to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And also the annual average growth rate of greenhouse gas emission itself has slowed down in last decade. But the absolute amount increase is unprecedented in our recorded human history. And also we have shown in the report that the remaining carbon budget to limit warming to 1.5 degree, we assessed it to be about 500 gigaton of CO2, and this means that time is not in our side. Similarly, the South Asia, where we are focusing in today's particular event, South Asia has about 1.8 billion population, and it contributes 8% of the global net greenhouse gas emissions. The per capita of the South Asia is around 2.6 ton of CO2 equivalent per person in 2019. And 4% of the historical cumulative CO2 emission is contributed by this particular region. So this region is also quite an important region. Then the question always comes whether what's a hope for us to move forward, because I showed you a bit of a complex picture. In our assessment, we have also shown that at least 18 countries have achieved very steady decrease in production and consumption CO2 emission longer than over 10 years time frame at the rate that is actually consistent with limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius. I already mentioned to you earlier that a greater range of policies and laws are implemented. In this assessment, we found that 56 countries have actually put such laws and policies in practice. They span from energy efficiency to reduce rate of deforestation, to accelerate deployment of renewable energy technologies to other things. Also, good news for us is that the report also showed that the unit cost of solar energy, wind energy, and the batteries have reduced significantly. 85% reduction in case of solar energy, and 85% reduction in case of batteries, 55% reduction in case of wind energy. So these are some of the positive things, and also deployments are rising. Over 10 times for solar, over 100 times for electric vehicles, for example. And also the good news is that the report shows that there are options available in all sectors that can at least halve the emissions by 2030. However, the report is clear that unless there are immediate and deep emission reductions across all the sector, 1.5 degree Celsius is beyond our reach. Why I'm saying this? Because if we project our current pledges, that keeps us into 3.2 degrees Celsius path. So in the assessed scenarios in this report, the global greenhouse gas emission must peak latest by 2025, and must reduce by around 43% by 2030 to stay in this limiting warming to 1.5 degree pathways. So which means that we might exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius temporarily, but we have to bring it back from the overshoot to 1.5 degrees Celsius to back to 1.5 degrees Celsius by reaching net zero emissions, net zero greenhouse gas emission, and also net negative emissions in the future. So as you can see, that challenge is quite big.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhakal. I can understand 6 years work is very difficult to confine in 3 minutes and tell us everything. But one thing I could very clearly hear is that existing knowledge being strengthened and new knowledge being generated, and science is very clear this time. And taking from what you mentioned, I would actually now like to invite Dr. Akhilesh Gupta. My question to you, Dr. Gupta, is does this IPCC 2022 report worry us enormously, particularly for a country like India? Because both the CLAs who just spoke now had very clearly indicated that countries like India would face challenges related to water, food, energy, as well as livelihood security. So how prepared are we? How are we taking this report? Dr. Gupta, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Namika, for having invited me here. And I'm very privileged to be among the galaxy of experts sitting on the screen. I think this is the moot question, for India. You see, globally, the clarity is now there that, all the developing and developed countries need to work together, but more responsibilities on developed countries to reduce the emission. And if, global emission to peak by 2025, I think there is a lot need to be done than what is being done. And but implication that developed country like India will have is going to be very, very severe in many ways. First, let me tell you that India is one country which has been making concerted effort and has contributed immensely to the mitigation, although it is not obligatory on India to undertake such measure. So the kind of announcement that we made, in the last COP, like how we are going to achieve a net zero emission by 2070, and also 500 gigawatt of non-fossil electricity by 2030, and many such things that we have promised. These show that India's commitment to undertake serious mitigation measures. But while it does those kind of measures at one end, India, along with all the regional countries here, are going to be impacted seriously, largely because of our population, high population density, also the level of poverty that all of us have, and also more importantly the kind of extreme events that are going to impact our countries. The duration, frequency, and the intensity, all the three things is going to be very different than what we had today. Now, with that scenario, when we are going to have extremes, both the extreme rainfall and also the extreme drought, I think this is going to impact all of us in many ways. One is direct impact to the population, but there are many indirect impacts. For example, the food security, water security, energy security are going to be impacted by such kind of changes. Of course, there is a need to have a collective wisdom of all the countries in the region must come together, work together, and face and meet these challenges together, both at the regional level and at the global level. We did one more thing, and this is the one step to understand the kind of impact that we are going to have. And Dr. Namika also participated in that exercise as a part of this DST effort, that we did a national level, district level, vulnerability assessment. And this was in the exercise, all 600 plus districts in the country were mapped. And now we have undertaken this exercise further, and now we are working on the disaster risk assessment. This is the first step that all of us need to take, so that we understand the present and future impact of climate change in different parts of our countries. This will give us an idea as to what is the quantum of impact we are likely to experience. Having said so, as I said, collectively, there is a need to develop a regional level cooperation and wisdom so that we can work together and put our voice, raise our voice at the international level. Because one issue that we all are grappling with, although both at the COP, at the in 2015 COP and recent COP, and there have been concern expressed by all the working countries, and India also was one of them, that while so much of expectations are there from developing countries, I think the fund flow from developed countries to developing countries rather slow and not up to the mark. I think this is a major concern. Without finances, the mitigation and adaptation action in the developing countries cannot take place with the pace that is required. And therefore, this is another area of concern for all of us, that while we, at the national level, we all undertake mitigation and adaptation measures to fight the menace of climate change, we must be given enough finances from the global community to meet the expenses that we are incurring on mitigation and adaptation. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. And you made two very important points. One is the regional cooperation and also the matter of finance. But we will take that up. But before that, I think another point that Dr. Gupta mentioned about is the impact of climate change. And here I would like to bring my good friend Anjal. And Anjal, you are the author of a very important chapter, and which is, I think, extremely relevant for South Asia, cities, settlements, and key infrastructure. So can you tell us what exactly is that chapter talking about, particularly given the extreme events which we are, there is clear understanding that it's going to intensify. So given that, how are our cities, South Asian cities, placed?
Thank you so much, Anamika, and very nice to be part of such an esteemed panel. Let me just focus on the key outcomes of the chapter on cities, settlement, key infrastructure as part of Working Group 2 of the IPCC report, which has just been out a month before. What we found is that, this is it's no-brainer that about more than half the population, world population, now lives in urban area, but 4.2 billion people out of 7.8 billion people actually are living in urban areas. And these areas, urban areas, are actually growing in very compounded ways, in a sense that just in 5 years, between 2015 to 2020, urban population globally grew about more than 400 million people, and about 90% of this growth actually has happened in the least developed countries or less developed countries. 35% of this growth has actually happened in South Asia. So we are actually going leaps and bounds when it comes to urban centers. And some of the population, I'll just give you the figures, like 20 million people living in Karachi, 13 million in Lahore, 14 million in Dhaka, 14 million in Kolkata. Delhi has about 30 million population, Mumbai 20 million. So we have the endless list of hugely populated cities. Now, these cities are also at a much greater risk because of the urban vulnerabilities and exposure that we have. So the sheer number of the people who are going to be exposed or who are being exposed. And there are three areas which I would like to highlight here, which the assessment has come out. One is definitely about the, what we call the climate induced hazards, such as vulnerability to incessant rainfall, precipitation event, which can lead to urban flooding, heat waves, and the third part is also about the sea level rise, especially for the coastal cities. So if you look at the map of South Asia, you'll find that the Himalayas are there. The urbanization in Himalayas has been also recorded in the assessment report, and we found that the rate of urbanization is very high without much of access to say basic services for people, and also induced climate, the hazards and the risk are increasing in the Himalayan regions. So that's in the Himalayan regions. Let's come to the coastal areas, and you'll find that the huge coastline that we have for South Asian countries. Just to, India itself has about 7,500 kilometers of coastline. Bangladesh is about 580 kilometers. About 1,000 kilometers of coastline in Pakistan. Sri Lanka has about 1,620 kilometers. So a number of people who are deriving their resources from the coastal resources are increasing. Coastal areas are also warmed up. The ocean is warmed up because it's sunk in all the carbon. So it's warmed up to about 0.8 degree from the pre-industrial age. That means it is actually leading to much more cyclonic events. So these areas also, cities are becoming much more exposed to cyclone events. And most of the people who are poor and vulnerable people who are living in cities, especially migrating from rural areas to have livelihood opportunities in urban areas, they are at much greater risk. Last point I would like to put forward is about heat waves. Now, at this moment, as I'm speaking to you from the city of Hyderabad, we are really under heat wave. The schools have been closed half day. Government has already given a directive. And imagine people who are construction workers, who are people who are directly deriving from the daily resources, they are actually at much greater risk. So heat wave is third area, which has been compounding quite a lot for all of us. And all these can be directly attributed to a changing climate. Just to sum up, so we have these challenges which are actually impacting our livelihood, our economies, and seeing that we are actually what we call the climate induced hazards such as cyclones, salinity ingress, heat stress, urban flood. These things are becoming an order of the day. And that means the cities has to be much more planning for their own resilience. We don't have any examples of any city which has come up with their own climate change action plan, except Mumbai, which has just come up last week, which has come up with a climate change action plan. There are some issues around that, but at least one city in the entire South Asian country that we have things. So we have to get the cities to act much better and plan for its own resilience. Over to you, Namika.
Thank you, Anjan. And you mentioned two very important countries here, both Pakistan and Bangladesh. I would first like to go to you, Saad. So you are from the PMO office, very powerful. So how are you looking at this report and how Pakistan is actually trying to build the resilience around its cities? Because in the report, as Anjan mentioned, there are certain cities of Pakistan which are also at high risk. So over to you, Saad. And I think you are muted.
Thank you, Anamika. Am I?
Yeah, fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to this panel discussion. I'm really honored to be part of it. This report sort of embodies everything that's wrong with that we have to tackle, right? There is absolutely no doubt when it comes to the government that Pakistan and the South Asian region and the world, I believe, we're facing this existential threat from climate, and this has definitely been an outcome of our own actions. The government of Pakistan has been very proactive in this last decade in particular. Given the agenda that the previous government brought in was rather quite all-encompassing. And the way the Ministry of Climate Change and the Ministry of Environment of our provinces, the way they came together was very, very specific. In Pakistan, for Pakistan, climate is a water problem. You know, the Indus Basin is what sustains life in Pakistan. It has over the past 5,000 years, the documented past 5,000 years. And then now the actual question for us is that will it sustain for another 100? Because all these challenges that we've talked about and that, you know, what the panelists have mentioned actually culminate and affect the basin to have been affecting the basin to a degree where it has changed our lives. So Pakistan has this, using this report, Pakistan has this rather comprehensive agenda. So we have 4 parts in particular. One, we have the carbon sequestration, that's through the tree program. Right? So we have the ambitious target of planting 10 billion trees, and a majority of that will come from regeneration. So we've enclosed areas, and we're going to plant 2.2 billion by 2023, and we expect a lot of it will be regenerated. The second is about renewable energy. The idea is that our commitment is to have 60% renewables by 2030. Then also reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030. In addition, there are these small pockets, right? So for example, even just the fact that protected areas, which is right now at 12%, we want to increase it to 15%, right? Or to actually introduce, small programs at the micro level, because the change that these initiatives require are at the local government level, most of it. So implementation will start from the community. Climate change adaptation and mitigation, from what we understand is a community-based intervention, because that's where the actual change happens. We can decide, what we've suffered so far is that we make policies in the ivory tower. And as a result, there is this massive gap between what the reality is and what the aspiration is. So this report in particular is something that, if it's sort of broken down well, absorbed well in the multiple institutes that we have, is and has been, that is how it will dovetail into the existing agenda of the government and sort of translate into implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I have a very quick follow-up question on this, what you mentioned. But one interesting thing what you mentioned is what even Dr. Gupta mentioned about this whole bottom-up approach, because even Dr. Gupta mentioned about the district level vulnerability assessment that India is doing. And you mentioned about community-based adaptation. What I want to know is there's one more point that Dr. Gupta mentioned was about funding. How do you look at that? I mean, from Pakistan's point of view, how important is the financial assistance to be able to implement this report?
So Pakistan is already, Pakistan has actually consistently been in this economic crisis where we our models have been more dependent on subsidies driving change, whether it was agriculture or any other sector. So in the climate change space, there has been a serious shift. The idea is to tap finance at the global level. So even though our public sector development programs, they do allocate a fair share, I say more than 10% of it has gone, or what has been spent has been on these projects. Our aim is to actually tap it from the global finance market, climate finance market. And we are going to pilot these green bonds, these performance-linked bonds very soon. That's already work in progress.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Saad. Fida, let me just quickly bring you in here. The kind of organization that you work, Fida, it is actually in the science policy interface. So how is your organization looking at this report? Because from Anjal's conversation with Anjan, we came to know that there is a lot of risk also in cities like Dhaka, for example. So how are you trying to help the government in implementing what the report is basically talking about?
Thank you, Anamika. As you know that the center is for the Center for Environmental and Geographic Information Services is a public trust under the Ministry of Water Resources. And we are heavily engaged with all the mitigation and adaptation reports. And fortunately, I mean, at the moment, the center is involved with the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change for preparation of the NAP. And as you know that Bangladesh is, I mean, what Professor Anjan already mentioned, that especially in the South Asia and Bangladesh, especially the city area and also in the coastal area, that we are highly vulnerable. And what we have done, I mean, considering this IPCC report, the 6 assessment, especially the working group 1 and working group 2, we're considering all this thing, and we try to identify the stress area for the whole country. And we considered the 14 hazards, and out of that we try to identify the 11 stress area, and having in the IPCC 6 assessment report, especially the 2 important issues are highly important for a country like Bangladesh, as we are the low-lying country of the 3 basins. We have city areas, we have the coastal area, and already we have 0.2 meter sea level rise. And as per the IPCC report, the recent report, we are expecting the sea level rise by the end of this century will be 0.95 meter. So it is a huge threat for the country. And we are fortunate in the sense that all these IPCC new ideas and the new adaptation and new thoughts out of the working group 1 and 2, that all we are trying to incorporate into the NAP, the National Adaptation Plan. I think this is the best way that we consider, because we have identified that if we are not able to adaptation and for the next by 2050, then our GDP loss will be more than 2%. So if you consider our GDP at the moment will be $416 billion US. So you can imagine at the moment we are losing 0.5%, and which will increase because of these extreme events is 2% of the total GDP. So following these 2 reports, we try to incorporate all the results, especially for the Bangladesh issue. As you know that there is one area for the coastal sea level rise at the Heron Point that we consider in our report. So that's the science to, we provide science to action. And another is alarming is the city heat island. If you see in the, land surface temperature, which was before in 1995, there is no land surface temperature of extreme temperature like more than 38. Now in Dhaka, it is about 14% of the total land surface temperature is extreme temperature, which is more than 38. So you can imagine that how this could be the in the next couple of years, the problem. So accordingly, we prepared the NAP, and the 4 components of this NAP. One is the coastal area, another is the agriculture, the third one is the urban, and also the marine and other areas. So we try to consider these all the stress, water stress, and also the heat urban islands, and also the sea level rise, especially in the coastal area. So this is for the time being. Let you come back to you if you have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Fida. I just want to quickly go back to Professor Roy and also Professor Dhakal, whoever would like to come in here. There is this discussion about finance, how the developing country gets the support from the developed world to really implement the suggestions that has come from the report. Would you like to add something to this? Would you like to react to this point?
Okay. If I go first, then I would say that, the report is very clear that Working Group 3 report is very clear that every government needs its strategies to be firmed up. And if you have the firmed up strategies, then you can look for funding, right? So now the question is that this report is very clear that financial flow are by a factor of 3 or 6 below the levels needed by 2030. This is very clearly, it has been stated. So finance which has been allocated is much lower globally, much lower than what is needed. And the challenge is of closing the gap is the widest for the developing countries. So this is acknowledged in this report. And but it also says that there is sufficient global capital and liquidity to close this investment gap. But it relies on signaling from the different governments and the international community. So there is need for, as I said, the strategies to be put forward. And there is need for also stronger alignment of public sector finance and policies. So international financial cooperation is central, and accelerating it to achieve low emissions for just access to finance and cost of and vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. So this report is very clear that there is need for bridging this gap for the developing countries by the international communities.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Gupta, I can see your hand and I will come back to you, but I think Professor Dhakal, you wanted to add something to this.
Yes, I just would like to only add, I think Joyashree very eloquently mentioned what is there in the report. I would only add that the report is quite clear in mentioning and concluding that climate finance in support of so-called just transition is likely to be a very, very successful low carbon transition globally, because that is quite essential. So I think the report is quite clear on that. Now different modality, how to bring it in. There are some ideas which Joyashree just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. So this point of the finance, I would really like all the 4 policymakers who are here, before I move to Abid and talk about the mountain report, to very quickly, like just 1 minute, because we don't have much time. What is your say on this, what Professor Joyashree and Professor Dhakal just mentioned? Yeah, Dr. Gupta, and then I would call Dr.
Very quickly, just 2 points. One is, of course, finance. I think I agree with Joyashree that it is this is 1 order or 2 order less fund that the developing countries have received than what was promised. If the report, the current report wants and put that pressure that we need to peak at 2025 without collective effort by all developed countries with developed countries, this cannot be achieved. And therefore, the flow of finance to developed countries is now become more important and urgent than it was earlier. This is the first point I wanted to say. The second issue is that the quantum of money required, in fact, has not been estimated properly. Look at the implication that we are going to have, say, a country like India. The migration of population and the climate refugees in the future going to increase like anything. The trend has already started. In the study that we did, Namika and her colleagues had led this, showing that entire eastern part of the country is highly vulnerable. And the population density on the eastern part is higher than the western part. And therefore, the jobs are created on the western side, the poverty lies on the eastern side, and climate vulnerability lies there. There's going to be a migration, and this will, in future, because I'm quite will lead to some other requirement of more money. And therefore, this issue needs to be cracked. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anjal, I'll come back to you. May I invite Mr. Bhaumik to please respond to this point from Bangladesh? Yeah, please. You are on mute. We can't hear you.
Thank you, Anamika, and presenters, panelists, climate experts, IPCC report authors, and very good afternoon to you all. It's my pleasure to be present here in this prestigious event. As we all know that IPCC AR6 report is a clarion call for a global community and especially for South Asian countries and countries like Bangladesh. Our priority, of course, as you know, that adaptation, but our efforts in reducing GHG emission and pursuing low carbon development pathway, considering our economic growth, we submitted ambitious NDC last year, as you know that. Despite being one of the most climate vulnerable countries, Bangladesh has appeared to be one of the pioneers among developing countries in maintaining economic growth through mainstreaming climate change into its development strategy. Bangladesh believes that Bangladesh is the first developing country adopted a comprehensive climate change strategy action plan, which is known as climate BCSP. And under this, Bangladesh enacted trust fund with its own resources, and also Bangladesh enacted Bangladesh fiscal framework in 2014, and now we updated it in 2020. Our budget also, if you see in our budget, we doubled our budget in last 7 years. In 2015, our budget only to address climate change issues, 1.45 billion. Now in 2021, we increased this to near 3 billion, and that is doubled in 7 years. This is our strategy. And another thing is I want to mention there that recently we now in the process of formulation NEP, and we tried in our NEP to incorporate all other relevant ministries, departments, and at present 26 ministries, divisions now working to address climate change issues. And this is our major focus to address climate change issues. As you know, that Bangladesh is a climate vulnerable. And as you know, that as a president, Honorable Prime Minister of CBF, 55 countries, Bangladesh now recently drafted MUZI Climate Prosperity Plan. And in our MUZI Climate Prosperity Plan, our main trajectory from vulnerable to resilience and resilience to prosperity. And also MUZI Climate Prosperity Plan main issue is energy independence, and also we give priority on how to we overcome locally led adaptation, give another priority issue. And as you know that we recently submitted updated ambitious NDC. In our recent NDC, our target is 90 million. We said in 2050, only 36 million metric ton will reduce by 2030. But in updated NDC, we raised it to 90 million metric ton. And also we included more sector areas like FLO, agriculture, waste sector in our recent update.
Mr. Bhaumik, you are breaking a bit.
This is the major issue. And NEP formulation process, we consult, target, NGO, civil society, all corners people we now included. Also, we include our give priority on gender inclusion. This all about our process. The Bangladesh government is trying with its best to address climate change issues and also pursuing in a low carbon development pathway. Thank you. And if question, next time I will join.
Thank you very much. Anjal, can you very briefly and quickly?
Very briefly, yes. No, I was, looking at the issue of climate finance. I was trying to say that we need to put it in the perspective of climate justice. See, look at the countries of South Asia. Some of the countries have actually either net zero or they contribute very little to the today's climate change problem, and that they are at the receiving end. Look at what is happening in Nepal, Bhutan, for example. Landslides are there. These are becoming order of the day. Kind of the problem that we have. Look at some of the coastal areas in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives. So we have, we are at a receiving end, and that's why the climate finance things, and I totally agree with Dr. Gupta, is that we need to really pitch in with the climate justice framework, and that gives us an edge to negotiate. And I think the COP27, where we need to negotiate hard, and also as South Asian countries together. That's point number one. Point number two is about some of the innovations which has also happened in this part of the world, which is also lauded in the IPCC report. I'll just give you one, which is about Bangladesh, the Bangladesh's Delta Plan, which has been really come up quite well and have included a lot of these climate change processes into them. Look at the Pakistan program, especially the what we call the Plant for Pakistan, the 10 billion tsunami tree plantation program. We have Harita Haran program in India. So many things, solutions also coming from this region is what I would also say to put forward. So 2 point, climate justice framework to look into, also looking solutions within ourselves, not looking up somewhere else for finding them, right? Over to you.
Thank you, thank you. I have to come to Abid now because I don't know if you're aware, Abid is also an alma mater of AIT, and AIT will really dislike me if I don't give him enough time to speak. So Abid, to you now. We have a very interesting chapter this time, which is the cross chapter on mountain. So I have like 2 questions for you. One is that why a separate chapter you feel would contribute more if it is focusing specifically on mountain, and what does your chapter talks about the mountains and particularly related to South Asia?
Thank you very much, Anamika. So the importance or inclusion of this chapter is very straightforward. I would say mountains are among the most vulnerable regions in the world and considered as the fragile ecosystems. Whatever happens in mountains, it impacts the populations in the downstream areas. I would like to give example of Hindu-Kush-Himalayan region, which is in the north of South Asia. This region accommodates 240 million people only. But whatever happens here, so it impacts the billions of people in the downstream. So if I consider the example of 10 river basins emerging from this region, around 1.9 billion population is dependent on the water coming from these rivers for food security, food production, and livelihoods or other uses of water. If I consider the overall mountains globally, so around half of the humanity is dependent on the water or ecosystem services which are coming from mountain areas. So that's why these are the reasons why mountains are considered globally important or considered in the assessment. Though there was one chapter on high mountains in IPCC's special report on oceans and cryosphere, but this is first time that it's included in the mainstream assessment. So I would like to come to the main findings of this report and its implications for the South Asian mountains. Very relevant. I could not find any finding in this chapter which is not relevant for our region. Number one, climate change impacts are increasing in the mountain areas of South Asia, and observed impacts covered, for example, changes in snow cover, changes in temperature and precipitation patterns, loss of glacier mass, and the changes in the timing of seasons and increased incidence of hazards like droughts, floods, landslides, and other associated hazards. Impacts are mainly negative, and most influenced sectors or aspects are agriculture, energy, tourism, pastoralism, biodiversity, demographies, as mentioned from Honorable Speaker from India. Migration is triggered by climate change. Before, it was seen as a standalone socio-economic change aspired by socio-economic desires of the people. But now, in this assessment report, it's coming very clearly climate change can also be triggered by climatic factors, and there are evidences on this. And all these things are actually impacting the overall ecosystems and economy of South Asian countries. I would like to give one example from the same region, Himalaya. So Working Group 1 report predicts very clearly that there is highly likelihood of increase in temperature in high altitude mountain areas and more temperature as compared to the global warming. And heavy precipitations are also predicted in the high altitude mountain areas. So imagine 4 river basins in the Hindu-Kush Himalaya, Amudrya, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Indus are having 25,000 glacial lakes. Temperature rise, heavy precipitation, plus this number of glacial lakes, we can imagine what will be the future in terms of risk. So this region is likely to face high incidence of droughts in future. That may have impacts on economy, infrastructure, ecology, and social settings also. This is very important. And more importantly, all these changes, what are predicted in this working group 2 report, are likely to continue in the whole of the 21st century. So there are more impacts are expected on agriculture, particularly in food production. One thing is very critical to mention. Climate change is also having impacts on food diversity, not only in terms of production, but also in terms of dietary diversity or food intake. So the climate change will not only impact the food quantities of food, what population is taking in, but it will also impact the nutritional aspects through micronutrients deficiencies and health impacts. These are very critical. Over from my side.
Thank you, Abid. So given what Abid mentioned, Dr. Bhatta, I would really like to know from you, how do you position yourself? You're from Nepal, and if you could specifically tell us about the, you have a very interesting framework, LAPA. How do you think LAPA needs to be re-looked at, given the present challenges that what Abid just mentioned?
Thank you, Anamika, for having me in this very important workshop. LAPA is one of the effective approach or a tool that systematically assesses climate vulnerability and identifies adaptation options through a participatory approach. Given the kind of climate change concerns highlighted by the report, I believe that LAPA alone will not be able to help addressing the extreme weather events that are likely to increase in near future, because there are limits to adaptation in cases where we fail to take immediate and ambitious actions to cut down carbon emissions. The adaptation technologies may not work. So in Nepal's case, due to the elevation-dependent warming phenomena, the country faces an even higher degree of risks, mainly those from increased cases of landslides, flash floods, droughts, and globs caused by increased temperatures and changes in precipitation patterns. Nepal has put forward the LAPA approach as an entry point for tackling climate change issues and started preparing LAPA from 2012-13, which laid the foundation for climate change adaptation in Nepal. But experience tells us that most LAPAs were not implemented due to the lack of their integration into the government's periodic plans and programs, because these were mainly developed on the project basis, So further, a lack of additional finance and expertise severely hampered the implementation of LAPA at the local levels. In terms of future plan, as per the spirit of Nepal Climate Change Policy 2019 and country's periodic plan, the current periodic plan, which is the 15th plan, Government of Nepal has already committed developing LAPAs of all 753 local government units by 2030, which I have already mentioned in the NDC. But we also have a plan to capacitate local resource persons and coordinate with the local governments for the integration of LAPA in their periodic plans and programs. So our approach is clear that we want to base the LAPA as a basis to help to address the local people from the impacts of climate change. Over to you, Anamika.
Thank you. Abid, just a very quick question related to what Dr. Bhatta had mentioned. In your report, you have also very categorically mentioned that, the whole process, the whole way of adaptation in terms of its scope and depth, it varies across. So can you just elaborate and tell us, maybe if you can give an example from Nepal and explain to us what exactly it means?
So, So mountain areas like Nepal and Hindu-Kush Himalayan region overall, if we see people have very limited access to capital, technology, and institutional services. Farmers are mainly smallholders and even a marginal farmers. Adaptation strategies in agriculture are mainly incremental. So not only in agriculture, also in non-agriculture sectors, also adaptation strategies are incremental. Mainly these strategies address the climate impacts in the short term. For example, measures taken to address climatic challenges in existing agriculture systems, whatever existing, pastoralism, tourism, or diversification of livelihoods. But the real problem is that institutions are also working on the same line. For example, early warning systems. This is also kind of incremental adaptation strategy. A combination of incremental and transformational adaptation strategies are important. I would like to give one example from Nepal, Pakistan, and other Hindu-Kush Himalayan countries. It's very clear from the report that snow line is moving upward. Tree lines are moving upward. Temperature rise is more in high altitude mountain areas compared to the global warming. And there are changes in hydrologies and climatic factors. It clearly tells, if we see beyond this report, it clearly tells that there are changes, are likely changes in future on agroecological conditions of our countries. But still we are sticking to incremental changes. Whatever cropping systems are existing, we are trying to make changes in those cropping systems or similar type of things in other sectors. There is need to bring transformational changes. What are transformational? Technology innovations, rethinking of agroecological zones, replanning of climate land use. So all these things are very important, supported by, of course, climate and advisory services, restructuring of market, redirecting and reproposing subsidies and financial services also very important for transformational change. Mostly subsidies are given on inorganic practices in agriculture, pesticides, fertilizers. Even if we give subsidies like India and Pakistan, good example on the mainstream cereals, wheat, rice, or maize. These things are going to mountain areas. Mountain farmers will not bother to cultivate or diversify their own agriculture system if they have subsidized mainstream cereals available in local markets. So this is one of the reasons why food systems in mountain areas are losing productivity as well as the diversity in response to climate change. So in short, we need transformational plus incremental both changes, but mainly changes are being made or strategies are being developed around the incremental scenarios. Over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Abid. I want to now just change the gear a bit. I'll come to you, Dr. Gupta, because I have a question for you, a very important question. But first, I want to go to Professor Dhakal and then to Professor Joyashree related to the working group 3. My first question to you, Professor Dhakal, if you could quickly help us understanding some of the terms which are being used in the IPCC report. I think it's very important for the countries to understand what is the difference between, for example, net zero CO2, carbon neutrality, net zero GHG emission, and also new negative CO2 emission. What does it all actually means to a country, and is achieving net zero really feasible?
Yes, thank you once again, Anamika. I think I also see one question in the chat by someone asking about the overshoot, because that also linked to the discussion of the net negative emission. So maybe you have seen in Working Group 3 report that we have used many different terms, net zero CO2 emission or carbon neutrality, but in the global scale, net zero CO2 and carbon neutrality, these are the equivalent terms at the global scale. This only means that this is a state where human-caused CO2 emissions is balanced by the CO2 removal from the atmosphere. Now, when we use the word net zero greenhouse gas emissions, then we also bring into picture a wider set of gases, not only CO2 emissions, that need to be counterbalanced by actually the removal of the equivalent amount of the carbon from the atmosphere. Even if if you really look at the country, for example, Thailand, where AITE is located, in Thailand, if you look at Thailand's pledge, Thailand has committed for carbon neutrality by 2050, but net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2065. So that's the difference, where you bring more than CO2 into the picture when you talk about net zero greenhouse gas emission. And now I also said earlier that future is very challenging in a sense that current pledges are not enough to avoid substantially, not enough to really reach to 1.5 degree warming. In our report, we have assessed that it will lead up to around 3.2 degrees Celsius pre-COP26 pledges, which only means that these are not enough. So now we need to bring forward these net zero emission, net zero greenhouse gas emission or carbon neutrality. Without that, achieving 1.5 degree is not possible. This is what IPCC report also saying that in that context, I think this also question of the overshoot comes. That means, it is possible to temporarily overshoot beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius, then again bring back to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we have to look at 1.5 degrees Celsius as a long-term target, so we can bring it back. But this is difficult, right? Bringing back is not difficult; is very difficult. And also during the overshoot period, there could be a lot of things could happen in the natural ecosystem. And if such overshoot persists for a long time, there could be a irreversible impact also. So that's why this whole question of the understanding carbon neutrality and net zero emission is very important, because that will really bring down things to 1.5 degree in the future. Of course, there are a lot of ways to do that. I'll not get into that detail. But we can discuss later if somebody has interest on these different types of so-called CDR technologies.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Dhakkal. Following from what Dr. Dhakkal has mentioned, I want to ask Professor Roy, given this, what are the options, mitigation options that are available for South Asian countries, and what would it really cost?
So basically, let me instead of giving you a laundry list of things that can be done, let me tell you one of the key messages that each country can shift their development pathways towards sustainable development by adopting various options in a variety of combinations to suit the national context. And several options have been identified across all socioeconomic activity sectors. Now, since 2010, as Shubhakar has already said, the cost of solar energy and wind energy are declining, and they are becoming cheaper than coal, oil, and gas. This is important because demand for fossil fuel is projected to reduce. This report is clear: to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, coal use without carbon capture and storage would have to fall by about 3/4, that means 50 to 90% by 2030. But the world will continue to use oil and gas until at least mid-century. So this is one of the goal, right? And one of the action needed. Now, I would say in this new report of Working Group 3, there has been a paradigm shift on the way we think about climate action, which is reported for the first time in this IPCC report through its first ever chapter on demand, services, and social aspects of mitigation, which puts people at the center and their well-being while mitigating climate change. For the first time, in concrete measurable terms, the report shows total mitigation target by 2050 compared to 2020 baseline through comprehensive demand-side strategies, demand-side mitigation strategies for CO2 and non-CO2 greenhouse gases can be reduced by 40 to 70% compared to the 2050 projected levels. So what it implies is, instead of putting all the burden of emission reduction completely on energy supply sector alone, demand side measures can realize the untapped potential of 40 to 70%. Now, the question comes how this can be achieved. This can be achieved, through reduced food waste by following sustainable, healthy dietary choices, acknowledging nutritional needs, adapting heating and cooling choices for thermal comfort in our homes and institutions and everywhere, implementing dress codes to get adapted to the the thermal comfort, integrating building renewable energy, electric light-duty vehicles, and shift to walking and cycling wherever possible, shared pooled and public transit system, sustainable consumption by intensive use of longer-lived repairable products to reduce the demand on the industrial production. Compact city design. By compact city design, we are meaning that where the economic activities are organized and services are organized in such a way so that you can use active transport of walking and cycling, and so that you can get the health benefit, but you can have access to all the other economic activities, like you're going to your job, going to your health facility, education, and everything. So we have actually identified 60 such options and presented their mitigation potential. By providing at user level access to energy efficient conversion technologies, the need for primary energy can be reduced by 45% by 2050 compared to 2020. And all these technologies are available in a cost-effective terms. So, but what it means is that individuals cannot do it on their own unless there is right kind of infrastructure, unless you have a walkable city, unless you have a cycling pathway in a city design, you cannot achieve these, right? So the IPCC report shows that individuals with high socioeconomic status contribute disproportionately to emissions and have the highest potential of emission reductions as citizens, investors, consumers, role models, and professionals. The lowest 25% of global population shown by income category worldwide faces shortfall in shelter, mobility, and nutrition. So addressing inequality and many forms of status consumption, that is the consumption which does not necessarily lead to well-being, but it's like keeping up with the relative status within the society, and focusing on well-being supports climate change mitigation efforts. So lifestyle change requires targeted policy support and investment in appropriate infrastructure, various use-centric technologies. So my question is, in this whole of South Asia, when now new infrastructure are going to be built and are going to be in place, we can actually design following these options so that the strategies can be created such a way so that we shift the development pathways towards sustainable development. So I'll stop here now.
Thank you. Thank you for all of those options that you have given. And it's quite interesting. And we are actually running out of time. That is the sad part of it. But I would really request all the policymakers to very quickly react to what Professor Joyashree mentioned just now. She has given us an enormous range of options. And one specific question to Dr. Gupta, which is a little controversial, but I can't stop asking you this: why 2070 is the net zero for India? From where this number came? So I just want to ask you that, along with what Professor Roy mentioned, if you could please very quickly, 1 minute to each of the policymakers to react to this point, which Professor Joyashree mentioned.
Yeah, let me say that, of course, we had strategic meeting, and Joyashree was also part of that. So I'm not going to reveal how 2070 came, but I think it is very reasonable, and in many ways. I'll tell you how and why. See, even if you take 2070, the targets that we have thought of are going for net zero. It entails huge amount of action. Number one, because basically the focus of India is on energy use. So by 2070, our renewable energy production must reach something like 5,000 plus gigawatt of energy, which is a huge task. Also, the usage of coal must reduce substantially by then, and also the crude oil, use. Also, it should reduce as much as 90% of today's level. Simultaneously, we need to have more green hydrogen production. Also the electric vehicle, because if we are transitioning from fuel to battery, I think you need electric vehicle. So there are a whole lot of transformational changes are required, and this cannot be done at a shorter goal like 2040 or 2050. It has to have see, all of us, and I'm saying not just India, all the regional countries, they need to grow. We are not at the level of Western world. We are yet to grow to a level. And therefore, we need to have a balance between sustainability and the development. That balance, we should not miss that point. And in order to reach that, we must create all balances. For example, renewable energy is a very important component that we all should create mix with the total energy, options that are available. At the same time, we need to address the Human Development Index. So development cannot be arrested just because we need to reach. That has to go side by side. That is a priority of all of us, all the countries. And therefore, I think what Jayashree has been mentioning, all these, there are various options that India is adopting: green building, better mobility, and better sustainability, and better lifestyle that our Prime Minister has been pursuing. I think all put together a bouquet of things that need to be adopted. And I again emphasize that point, that there is a need for regional cooperation in this area, because then we can learn from each other. There are practices that each one of us have adopted, can be shared, and therefore we need to have some kind of sharing of knowledge that can help each other. And we must work in the next COP together to place our point of concern for this thing, for meeting the challenges of climate change. I think I will stop here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. To Mr. Bhomik, how do you react to this point?
Thank you. As you say, this especially joyously right, that as you think that Bangladesh target renewable energy by 2041 40%, and at present just only 3%. And as you know that Bangladesh is a land scarcity country, still we are in our recently we drafted energy roadmap and give priority. Also, we give priority on electric vehicle. And we recently adopted taking a project with the support of World Bank and ADB. And we believe another thing that, as you know, that in Bangladesh, we are giving priority on BRT and MRT transport. And also modal ship, we give priority. We give priority on rail than our bus transport to limit the GHG emission. And fossil fuel, use of fossil fuel, we discourage. And how to discourage, we're taking a plan. And we are going on the right track, and we believe our Honorable Prime Minister give priority that keeping momentum with our growing economy, we are targeting to how we increase solar energy from our existing 3% to 40%. We trying with all relevant ministries how to expedite use of solar energy. And we're taking several projects in tender process, and we believe we will fulfill our target by 2041.
Thank you. Thank you. To you, Dr. Bhatta, how is Nepal going to respond to this?
Thank you. I think Nepal has put very ambitious target in its NDC, in the NDC that we submitted in December 2020. So we have a plan to, Nepal plans to maintain forest area up to 45%, generate more power using clean resources, increase use of clean energy for cooking and transportation, and reduce carbon emissions by proper handling of treatment of waste. However, the major limiting factor for Nepal would be the finance, because the total cost of the NDC implementation is around $35 billion, of which Nepal can only afford $3.4 billion from its resources. So there are, and mostly we have to rely on international climate finance, but we are also coordinating with subnational governments, private sectors, and banks for leveraging domestic finance. Further, at the COP26, we have already committed that Nepal will become carbon neutral by 2045. So by adopting green and inclusive growth pathway, Nepal's plan is to send a clear message to the other countries that we have pushed our limits and now it is other countries' turn to come up with ambitious targets for addressing the biggest threat humanity is facing on Earth, which is climate change. Finally, Nepal aspires to be a leader in not only adaptation sector, but also in mitigation sector, despite its negligible contribution in global greenhouse gases. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anjal, I have seen your hand, but I have a question. So yeah, go ahead quickly, Anjal.
Yeah. Just very quickly, I just want to humbly, disagree with Dr. Gupta. The way in which Western countries have developed that you develop, pollute, and then try to fix the environment. If we take the same path, first of all, the planetary boundaries have already been crossed, so we can't develop, pollute, and then try to fix it because that path is not there at all. Why can't we go for an alternative model which will, not only develop, but at the same time also develop with what we call the green growth development process. So that is the alternative vision which is lacking, and that's why I try to refute with Dr. Gupta very humbly, but trying to put forward this point. Over to you.
Okay, we will come to Dr. Gupta now. Anjal
No,
has
I think just one 10 seconds. No, I think I didn't say that, you develop the way Western we are developed. We have a better direction to develop, but, sustainability need to be ensured. But at the same time, the green development is definitely a route that we must take.
Okay. Okay, Saad, where are you? I cannot see you. Yeah. Okay, Saad, I want to know from you. Okay, everybody has mentioned about what they are doing and how they want to do, but can you very briefly tell us what are the challenges for Pakistan and also for South Asian countries as a whole? What do you see as a challenge?
I think speak for challenges. I think Pakistan is very similar. The South Asian region is very similar. So the kind of challenges we're facing, the solution is sort of the same. I think there are three parts to it, and I know times are constrained. When you look at the layers of challenges, one is the broader one, which is, do we have the vision and do we subscribe to it? The second is, how do we translate that vision into a plan? And the third is, how do we operationalize the plan? So when we look into the challenges, the first one, the vision itself, I think the biggest challenge is that we're building the plane as we're flying it. It's a moving goalpost. Because as we move from one year to the next, and as we sort of also retrospectively analyze what's been happening over the past 2 decades, we see that, we find it difficult to come to agree to targets. How do we? So that's the first step, I feel, and I think that challenge has been overcome. And I think what IPCC has done is this way forward, that it brings people together. The second part, I think the challenge is on building the plan. I think capacity constraints and finance and also political capital. So when we bring this together, whenever we're building a plan, we're sort of disturbing the equilibrium, whether that equilibrium is right or wrong. So the climate space has its own equilibrium. So for example, when I talked about the basin, it's an equilibrium between the water quality, the water quantity, and the ecology of the basin. But when I take a step back and I look at the bigger picture, I see there's an equilibrium, but then there's also a massive equilibrium which is being guided through the pressure of growth. So we are developing countries. South Asia is a developing region. We all stand at different stages. So for us to come and make a plan on that, and also to understand how that plan dependencies within each sector. So for example, electric vehicles in Pakistan have heavily distorted local manufacturing of cars. Just one policy change on reducing custom duties on electric vehicles to 0 or to 25% versus 300% on other imported vehicles has caused challenges. So that's just one example I'm talking about. Now, when you come to operationalizing that plan, that's where the amount of political capital, I think South Asia needs to dedicate political capital to this cause. And climate has no boundaries. It's an existential crisis. We have to accept it. It is beyond race. It is beyond religion. It is beyond everything. And for us, you know, as it was pointed out, I think by by Abid Hussain on the mountain part, where that it's not just about the quantity of food that's produced. So when you are operationalizing something like this, you really need to be very clear on what the vision is, what the plan is, and how much political capital you have. Because if these ingredients are missing, you will not get the finance. You will not be able to generate the muscle to actually put this plan into action. And I think these challenges are present at every level of implementation, whether it's the federal level, the provincial level, the local government level. It's just that how one has to target it. And this is going to be, so whatever we decide, whatever solution the world comes to, I think what we need to realize is that we are building a plane as we're flying it. And this plane is not static. It's not reached a particular altitude. It's basically on full throttle. So, and every minute it's changing. So I think these are the challenges which really, I think they're not specific to Pakistan, they're specific to South Asia.
Great, thank you so much, Saad. Well said. So there are a few more questions, but I cannot now continue because there are several questions from the participants, and I think it would become very monotonous if we don't take their questions. So Devesh, can I just request you to very quickly, because I think there is a question for Fida, so that's why I didn't go back to Fida. Maybe you can just pose that question to Fida, what the participants want to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Anamika. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll start with Dr. Anjal because he is in quite a hurry.
Okay.
So, the question to you is posed by Sumit Rizi, and he asks you, there is a need for regional adaptation and mitigation efforts, but the current report has been quite silent on talking about the transboundary water, and especially the politics of adaptation at transboundary level are quite missing. And even the literatures on geopolitics and hydropolitics are missing in itself. So how would the future climate reports and future regional efforts on climate mitigation and adaptation occur at these conflicting river basins?
Thank you so much, Sumit, for this question. The transboundary issues has been dealt in Chapter 4 of the Working Group 2 report, 4.3.6 to be precise, where we look at the water conflict and how it is transboundary in nature. And we do cite, some of the examples from South Asia as well, because it's a global report. South Asia is one of the data points, and that's why we need to really balance it out for other things, but we do mention it. Let me just pick up one or two points from this report, which will be helpful. So one is that we are saying that for transboundary water, the probability of interstate conflict, in conflict between two countries, can both increase and decrease depending on the climate variables that we are in, and also the other socioeconomic and the political factors, such as low level of economic development or political marginalizations. So that's number one. Second is we're looking at how climate change concerns also play a stimulating role in cooperating, cooperation among countries. In the case of Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna River Basin has been cited in the report. Though we don't have much of literature, there was a medium confidence to conclude on these lines, but then there's definitely the cooperation which is leading to certain countries to come together and have agreement on that one. Last point I would like to make here is that in some evidence that we have is when the hydrological condition change in transboundary river basins through formal agreements such as water treaties or river basin organizations, it can enhance cooperation, which is actually the assessment shows that it's a median confidence, but we are in high agreement that it should enhance or it can enhance cooperation. But we still have literature is not telling us about how more cooperation leads to reducing in risk or where water variability is increasing because of certain threshold that we are in. So that's where we have slightly low evidence, but medium confidence that it is possible. So I guess people like you, Sumit, will have to do a lot more research. I know your work in Transboundary River Basin, and other people who are listening to us, please work. And in the 7th assessment report, we must have a separate chapter on this one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Anjul. So I hope that satisfied your query, Sumit. So my question is now to Dr. Fida. And this question is asked by Reena. And she says the sea level rise in India and Bangladeshi Sundarbans has resulted in standing water and increased salinity, which in turn has affected farmers and livelihoods, and drinking water is headed to be in a problem. So what is Bangladesh doing to fight this?
Thank you for the question. Actually, as I have earlier mentioned, that in the NAP documentation, we are a lot of adaptation measures. So one of the adaptation measures that we have mentioned is, as in the coastal area, we have 139 polders. So we are suggesting to increase the polder height. And also because of the sea level rise and the salinity intrusion, we are also proposing for the upstream freshwater flow. Only solution is that either you push back the salinity front by the freshwater, additional freshwater flow. So this is the two strategy or the actions that we have proposed in the NAP. But at the same time, we are also proposing a very good length of the green belt, which is very important for the country, not only the Sundarban, but also from the 700 kilometer, the coastal area. So about the Sundarban, one of the important is the freshwater supply. I think that which is very important from the Ganges River, and we have a treaty with India for 2026. The treaty will be expired, but until that, whatever the flow that we are getting, for the time being, we are pushing back the salinity from the Sundarban area by dredging the mouth of the river Garai, which is the only source of fresh water in the southwest region of Bangladesh. And also we are trying to, popularize that the flow between the two countries, especially the transboundary issues, not only the two countries, 3 or the 4 countries, that we have to consider the environmental flow, the flow for the ecosystem. If I can able to make a quantum of water for the river ecosystem, so definitely that can be also possible to, retain the Sundarban with their original beauty. And about the livelihood, I think that in the NAP, we have proposed what are the other alternatives. And we are trying to propose the climate change is once we take the adaptation. So also there is a taking the, if you see the definition of the adaptation for the better opportunity or creating new opportunities. So for the livelihood, we are also trying to introduce the new area of the livelihood alternatives. So one of the important will be the, in the coastal area, especially for the harvesting of the seaweeds. So it is very popular. And if there will be a sea level rise, so this will be a new area for the livelihood for the coastal area people, the seaweed harvesting, and many other, many cultures, and also the case culture that we are proposing in the brackish or in the saline area. So these are the way that we are tackling. But I think that as a downstream country, but we must be agree for the environmental flow and flow for the pushing back the salinity intrusions, especially not only Bangladesh, but also in the West Bengal in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fida. So now I move to move my question to Mr. Saad Hayataman. The question asked to you is, what Green Climate Fund, the GCF mitigation initiatives are currently underway in Pakistan, and how many are planned for the future?
Yes, thank you. I believe it was, did a personal reply to the person. So currently there are 2 large programs. One is on the glacial lake outburst floods, and the second is one on climate resilient agriculture. in 8 districts across Pakistan. The focus has primarily been more on adaptation because that's where the grant, the kind of finance involved in it. But however, going forward, there are lots of programs that are going to be pitched to the GCF. Then they're primarily going to be focused on restoring the basin's health. And one that would probably potentially be going soon is again on, I believe it's on groundwater recharge. So it's Recharge Pakistan across the basin. So different activities, which includes both quality and quantity.
Thank you, Mr. Taman. So now the questions are more general. The remaining questions are more general questions, and it could be answered by any panelist. I'm just going to pose the questions, and if you'd like to answer, please feel free to answer the question. The first question is, how do we translate this report to local government or even local communities? So how are these reports, I think he means translated at the grassroots level, at the local government or even at the local communities? How are the information of the report conveyed to them? Yes, Mr. I think we'll start with Dr. Abid.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very relevant and billion-dollar question. So in my opinion, personal opinion, this is the responsibility of national governments to analyze the findings of such global assessments. For example, I would like to give example from Indus River Basin. So report clearly tells working group 1 report and the working group 2 report. Both reports clearly tell us there will be change in melting rates of glaciers, right? So snow line will be moving upward. There is also likelihood of increased incidence of floods and droughts. If you see the Indus River Basin, around 70% water is contributed by snow and glaciers. It clearly tells us how serious implications for this river basin be in future. Another thing, similar finding I would like to relate to the high altitude traditional irrigation systems. There are around 6,000 high altitude traditional irrigation systems only in the Karakoram and Hindu Kush part of Pakistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, areas of KPK, particularly in Chitral. These high altitude irrigation systems are called pool. In India, also in thousands, in Uttarakhand, Arunachal Pradesh, and other states. These irrigation systems are mainly fed by glacier water. And report also says that there will be changes in the timing of melting, right? Mostly crops are cultivated in April in high altitude areas, main cultivating time period. If changes in glacier melting and changes in the availability of water in these traditional irrigation system will of course have serious implications for those high altitude irrigation systems and crop and agriculture production also. So this is the responsibility of national governments to see and analyze the findings of such reports and translate these reports into local adaptation plans and national adaptation plan. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Abid. Before I come to Professor Joyashree and Saad, I will also ask the same question to Dr. Arun. This I ask particularly because Nepal as a country is a very nascent federalized country. Very recently, Nepal does not really have expertise. I mean, the local government are not very well equipped to deal with such challenges, and the number of technical people at the local levels are also pretty low. So in this regards, how are we trying to convey these messages to local governments and helping them to, you talked about LAPA, but then, the message that the IPCC 22 is giving at the moment, how are we conveying this message to the local government at the local level?
Thank you, Devesh, for this question. I think it's very challenging, because the local governments in Nepal have 4 years of experience, so they are quite new, And when we visited local government last time, a month ago, and I interacted with them, so they have very little knowledge about climate change and mainstreaming gender into their local level planning process. So surprisingly, I found that at the international level, we are raising the issue of loss and damage. But if you look at the local level development approaches, then they are just doing opposite of that. So maladaptation practices are actually, you could see in the field. So it's very challenging to tell them the climate resilient approach. So one of the things we should do is to capacitate them, to raise awareness, and also help preparing guidelines. What do you mean by climate resilient agriculture? What do you mean by climate resilient infrastructures? We don't have standards, we don't have guidelines. So there is an urgent need to develop those standards and guidelines and capacitate local people and governments and also the local leaders. Is very important. Political boundary is very important. So there is a lot of things to do in future, and we have a plan to do them in a subsequent way. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Professor Joyashree, would you like to go?
Yeah, I'll just share with you that what has been happening over, say, 3-4 assessments when the reports come out from IPCC worldwide, right? So basically, we say that these IPCC reports are giving you the global level what needs to happen and gives an indication what can happen at different local context and national context. Then we have seen, I'm starting from, the fourth assessment report, I have seen that what the countries do is they engage so the country governments engage their local researchers, as Dr. Gupta was saying, how Anamika was involved in a vulnerability assessment plan funded by government. So local researchers provide those knowledge support. And so involving the local researchers into the whole process, educational institutions, research institutions are very important. And that has been happening throughout the world. And that's how they are providing the local knowledge. Second thing, as I heard from Nepal, is that exactly that you need to prepare the local knowledge products. I remember in the last cycle, CDKN played a very important role to come up with what does it mean for each country in these regions. So there are other funding sources which help the NGOs and the local researchers and the local governments so that they can come up with a translational knowledge product out of the IPCC report. So there are huge research and knowledge products really need to come up and involving the local experts and local expertise and the local education institutions. There I see the institutions like AIT and all the universities locally are very, very important.
Thank you, Professor Joyashree. Dr. Fida, would you like to go? And then I'll come to Dr. Saad.
Yeah, I just have a few points. I think the most important, the way we have done, we translate and transform the WMG, the working group 1 and 2 into a national adaptation plan. Once we develop this national adaptation plan, what we are now doing, we are proposing for the LAPA. At the same time, we are promoting the locally led adaptations. So we are trying to do now at the moment that how the locally led adaptation are impacted by the scenario or by the climate change projections. And accordingly, we are suggesting the local community, which is also called the community-based adaptation, that how you are cope with the new scenario or the new changes of your locally led adaptation. So in our transformation case, we are proposing this thing, and we are also proposing the local that what are the opportunity will create, which is very, very important. If you only consider the protection against the climate change, it is not enough, that you have to think what are the additionality, what are the opportunities creating. If you can able to translate this IPCC report into national level to the local level, that these are the opportunity will create, and these are the area in the fisheries or in the agriculture that you can have a new dimensions, which can also generate the financial thing, or also which will contribute in the, the livelihood of the local people. I think that is the way that the transformation will be possible. And also the capacity development, we also propose the transformative capacity development. So that is also important. The system level, in the institutional level, also in the individual level. So at the moment, the some part of the NAP, what we are doing, that the executive summary or the short report, we will translate it into the local language in Bangla, especially in Bangladesh. And we are disseminating in the different ways. I think that is the best way that the local farmer or the local people can understand that how the climate change, especially the sea level rise, what will be the impact, and what will be the climate signal like temperature could be, impacting the agriculture, or also the fisheries, also the forest. So this is the best way. The communication skill is very important. And that we are trying to do, how to transform and translate in a very, shorter and very, elegant way, so that people of the local people who are the illiterate or semi-literate, they can easily understand the message of the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fida. Mr. Taman, would you like to please be very quick though?
Yeah, I will. Thanks. So, just very quickly, if you look at how the world got to it, so just imagine the countries to be local governments, and when they all came together on the Paris Agreement and they signed up for something, and how that got translated to each country. So it's very similar in each country, where you have the national government and it gets translated to the local government. So there are two levers. One, the carrot is the incentive. So you need to have the right incentives in place, and these incentives then lead to different reforms. So for example, tax reform is one reform that would be pivotal in setting the right incentives for the local government to take these actions. The second thing, and that's very popular now, is the deliverology approach, which is you have the right set, you have the right toolkit to monitor this. And what you're monitoring depends on what research has gone in. So for example, if this report is now translated into a plan, so you need the right monitoring mechanisms, the right tools with the right routines, the right stock takes, and the right incentives. So everything comes together, and that's how this will get translated properly at the local government level, provided the prerequisite series of reforms are all in place.
Thank you, Dr. Taman. Now you've heard from each countries and how this report is being translated at local level and what the policies are in place. So the next question, I think I would prefer Professor Takal. It's a general question, but I would prefer Professor Takal if he would answer the question, because he's the only one who hasn't answered so far. So the question is, besides the optimism of the report mentioning that the emission could be reduced by 40 to 70%, do you think this is an achievable target, given that one needs to have compact urban designs in place? And we all know the manner in which our cities are growing. They are bound to further spread out.
Well, thank you. I think in the interest of time, I'd be very short. I'd say not, but maybe can do or not. From the viewpoint of climate change, maybe this is what we must do. But from the viewpoint of science, particularly from the report's viewpoint, there are lots of options which are possible, lots of options which can be implemented at reasonable costs. Joyashree already mentioned that, lots of different technologies, different lifestyle features, different other kind of options, both supply side, demand side, all those have been assessed. Now, it's for decision makers to decide what they want. Actually, when it comes to the urban sector,
Professor Takal, you're breaking out. We cannot hear you. Hello.
I think the Zoom is somehow thrown me out.
You're in now. Yeah, I think we can hear you.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. What I was saying is that there are a host of different measures which are lined up in the IPCC report. So many of them, in order to implement, definitely lots of things need to be done by the decision makers in order to set right set of policies, in order to create a different kind of enabling environment. But there are many options which can be done, and especially when it comes to urban context. The report has outlined lots of things, for example, transport, buildings, urban design, urban planning, urban space management. So these options are definitely what we have to bring it forward. So in the interest of time, let me limit my interventions here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. May I now hand over it to you, Dr. Anamika, and then you may take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devesh. I just want to the students of AIT has prepared this slide and have shared it with me, what they see as the key takeaway from the discussions that we had. They are all students of my class, so I'm feeling very proud about it. So I just wanted to thank you very much. And I would also like to extend my heartfelt thank to entire colleagues of AIT for supporting me in organizing this event. Thank you very much to all the panelists for patiently answering all the questions. It was a very, very interesting and interactive session. You all actually stick to the time. Plus minus 5 minutes is always acceptable. So thank you very much. And it was a pleasure having you all on board. Thank you to all the participants, media, who all are joining us. And so, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and my special regards to Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much.
He is my teacher.
Oh, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.